coordinate and synchronize in the speed of thought. And so one of the things that we have to realize is that given the typical human brain contains 86 billion neurons, each with thousands of those electrical connections, it sounds like getting this brain initiative underway is going to be an enormous task, and it will be. So what even makes this challenge possible? All right, it's new advances in computer science, math, this nanotechnology, which allows us to look and deal with things that are so small that it would take thousands. Visualization, where now we can see parts of the body and the heart pumping and doing things that we never could see before in real time. And they're empowering us. They're empowering the scientists to study simpler brain systems and ultimately the living brain as an entire organ. Just like a heart, the living brain as an entire organ will be an immense technology breakthrough. All right? So what is the payoff in all of this? By exploring exactly how the brain enables the human body to record, process, utilize, store, and retrieve vast quantities of information at the speed of thought, researchers will be able to develop new ways to cure and even prevent brain disorders. So simplifying the whole thing, this initiative, this brain research through advancing innovative neurotechnology, is going to begin on a simple level moving forward to use all of the latest technology that we have available and that will be created, all right, in order to be able to get a better handle on how the brain looks while working and how we can do things differently, like look at this synaptic C1Q and determine whether it's pruning or whether or not it's destroying our synapses, all right? The human brain today still remains one of science's greatest mysteries and one of the greatest challenges in medicine. Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, autism, epilepsy, schizophrenia, dementia, depression, traumatic brain injury, and other neurological and psychological conditions exact a tremendous toll on us as individuals, our family caregivers, and society at large. The cost of these illnesses is monumental. We know that the indirect cost for Alzheimer's and related dementia right now is around $500 billion, all right, just if we paid the caregiver essentially about $10 an hour. So when you add in all of the other things that we've never even talked about, epilepsy, autism, etc., the cost in human distress to the caregiver, as well as the cost in actual medical care, because we don't really understand how to go after it. So this brain initiative is really quite something. And so what's the rush to do this now? Well, 5 years ago, a project like this would have been considered impossible because we wouldn't have had the technology. 5 years from now, will be too late, because while the goals are profoundly ambitious, the time is right now to inspire a new generation of scientists and researchers to take on the most groundbreaking approach ever contemplated to finding out how the brain works. You know, the folks we have in it now are doing a great job, but they're carrying the banner forward. But what we need is the next round of researchers and doctors and scientists who are willing to make an even more concerted effort, who are experienced or are being taught all the latest technologies to point them at the brain. All right? And as a result, we may very well see, in conjunction with understanding things better like these synapses and C1Q and this brain initiative, that maybe in the near future we'll have a much better handle on what causes these diseases, and maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to slow it down. I don't think that we're going to be able to stop it just yet unless something radical emerges. But I think that if we can advance the scientific research and get moving forward using all of this new technology, that we will find breakthroughs. I think that human wisdom and ingenuity and stick-to-itiveness and the desire to figure out what can't be figured out drives the community to make it all worthwhile. One of the other things that I want to make very, very clear as we move forward with these new technologies, these new techniques, finding new drugs, it's critical. It is absolutely essential that those of our loved ones that have or think they have dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever it may be, volunteer and sign up for the research. If we do not have human beings that are willing, once they've been diagnosed with cognitive impairment, who are willing to be part of this drug testing, we will never be able to determine whether or not it works on humans. You know, it's one thing when we can take direct cancer victims and say we want to try out this new experimental drug, and they can give their answer, all right? But in this particular case, once we have neurological problems that create loss of memory, loss of thought, it really depends on the rest of the family. It depends on the family caregiver. And they may say, no, I don't want you to do that. But understand that coming right behind this group of older folks are the boomers. And there are some real distressing statistics, not so much on Alzheimer's, although it certainly is showing up younger and younger and younger, all right? And so that says that some folks don't even get to be 70 before they get Alzheimer's. Some people are in their late and mid-50s, and I'm seeing more and more of that in my support groups because I'm finding younger spouses that are showing up and saying, and I say to them, are you taking care of your mother or your father? And they say, no, I'm taking care of my husband or my wife. And so this is something that's so critical. In order to advance the research, we need the help of the world. We need the help of folks that already have dementia, who hopefully will be in a position to let the researchers find out if this stuff works. You know as well as I do that the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, will not let a drug come to market until it has been through not only animal testing, but human testing. And human testing requires humans. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and before I get into it, because it's going to be part of a multi-part series, there was a very interesting release from AARP in the past few days, and its headline is "Huge Shortage of Caregivers Loom for Baby Boomers." And this is something that we need to realize, that over the next 15 years, the youngest baby boomers will turn 65. And the age of the baby boom and the growing care gap looks at future declines in the availability of family caregivers. One of the reasons, all right, we have more broken families. We have families that don't have as many children, all right? We don't have the same scenario that we've had for the last 40 or 50 years of larger families, all right? And every time there's an economic depression, we find that we have less children. But here's the issue. Between 2010 and 2030, the caregiver support ratio, which means caregivers to people that need care, is expected to plummet as the boomers transition from caregivers to being the care recipient. The caregiver ratio is expected to decline further as boomers complete the transition to the high-risk years of 80 and older, all right? And so right now that ratio peaked in 2010, all right? It was about 7 caregivers for every person needing it. Already by 2013, we're down to about 5. All right? By the time the boomers all turn 65 in another 15 years, it'll be somewhere between 2.5 and 3 to 1. And after that, who knows? And as we well know, that it's the family that supports all of this. If we have to find paid caregivers for all of these boomers, there is no economy that we can develop that can support it. Right now, with the peak of the caregiving going on, $500 billion today will be $2 or $3 trillion 15 years from now. Beyond that, well, who knows? But it's going to be cost ridiculous to be able to move forward with anything unless we get our arms around aging, we get our arms around dementia, and we figure out a way, because people are going to have to stay home. There's no place else to put them, and there's no place else they'd rather be than to be able to find caregivers that can take care of them. All right? And more than half, 57% of the paid home health aides today are age 45 and older. These direct care workers who are self-employed or working for private households on average are 48 years old. So these two are the last part of the boomers. All right? And when they turn 65, the likelihood of them being able or wanting to still continue to take care of folks will remain to be seen. So just like the nursing workforce has been aging, and we're trying to replenish it by getting new nurses back in the field. But one of the things that happened when it slowed down a few years ago, a lot of nurses went back into private practice, went to work for hospitals and nursing homes, and got out of teaching. And today it's very hard to find nursing school teachers to be able to educate this upcoming workforce of nurses that are going to be needed, because they're going to be the first line of geriatric care. They're the first line of what we're going to be able to do to treat the aging community that will be the United States of America and soon the world. I wanted to bring something to you that'll be part of a multi-part series, and it involves a doctor by the name of Dr. David Hilfiker. And he is a doctor, a researcher, and he has Alzheimer's. All right? And so he has started to post his experiences as an Alzheimer's victim, as well as look at it from the perspective of a doctor and a researcher and an intellectual. And he starts out, and this will be ongoing as I find more and more information and more of the things that he's written. It starts out, I have Alzheimer's disease. Technically, as there is no way to know for certain whether a living person has Alzheimer's, my diagnosis has been classified as progressive cognitive impairment. It's still pretty early on in the illness, so most outside observers haven't begun to notice the changes yet. I don't feel abnormal, at least not right now. However, I have begun to pinpoint the areas of my life most affected by the broadening gaps in my memory and in my cognition. As a retired physician, I'm an intellectual. A large part of my self-image is invested in my intelligence, my insight, and perceptive analysis. And I'm blogging about my experience because it may be helpful for people to know what the world looks like from inside a fading mind. To dispel some of the fear and embarrassment that surrounds the disease, I am well aware that many of the capacities that I am losing over the next years will be precisely those that have been essential to my identity. So I want to ask the hard questions. What is the experience of losing one's mind? Do I still experience myself as the same self? I don't know how long I'll be able to continue this journey with you, but I am willing to be your guide for as long as I can. And then he went on to talk about something that I found very interesting. I went and found a little more of what he had begun to say. And he said, actually, I've been noticing symptoms for a while, but was still surprised by my doctor's diagnosis. Over the past several years, my memory has significantly declined. This is a common complaint for people as they age. For 20 years before he died, for instance, almost every time we visited, my father asked again for reassurance that he didn't have Alzheimer's. His memory loss, like many other older people, was mostly for names and faces. I've always had that kind of poor memory, but I began losing memory in other areas as well. 2 years ago, an entire trip to a rural area of Southern Virginia disappeared from my memory. I drove down to visit a friend of mine who was in prison, and I had never realized that I had been there. However, both the warden, who I'd made acquaintances with, the chaplain, and my friend all reminded me that I'd been down there 3 or 4 times before. I chalked it up to a single bizarre experience that would probably not mean so much to a doctor, so I didn't do anything except tell my friends a little bit about the story. Some months later, I couldn't recreate a computer spreadsheet formula that I'd written several years earlier. In fact, I went back and examined the formula from an old spreadsheet. I couldn't even understand what I'd done. Such calculations difficulties persisted. I went to a neurologist in the fall of 2011 for testing, and he said that I did have cognitive impairment, but it wasn't severe, and the relative point was whether it was progressive. Subsequently, he has found out that it is progressive. I returned last fall, and yes, the impairment had progressed. There aren't too many likely candidates for causes for progressive cognitive impairment. The neurologist performed tests for them. They were all negative. There is no certain test for Alzheimer's except to rule out the other candidates. So the overwhelming likelihood is that I have early Alzheimer's disease. Do you know how many times over and over and over again in America, with 5.2 million Alzheimer's patients and without even counting related dementia, and hundreds being diagnosed weekly, what this story, which I'm going to be relating to you over the next few weeks, has such an impact? I want you to understand it. It's critical that you understand it, because you are part of the solution. Just as the researchers are, just as the brain study is, it's you, the family caregiver, you, the family, that has to realize that if we don't have your loved ones to help us understand whether or not the research and the drugs that we're creating are going to work, we are destined to have these numbers just multiply and multiply. Here is an intelligent, well-trained individual who, until he stops being able to cognitively function, is going to be telling us his story. And in turn, I am going to be relating it to you, because it's essential that you know and understand. I don't like bringing scare stories without bringing situations that may provide relief. And I think the C1Q and I think the Brain Initiative are part of the upside of where we're going. And the doctor's story is part of the reality of what that story is all about. So, Boca Raton, America in the world, this is David Levy, gerontologist, family caregiver expert, bringing you another series from CareGiverReality.com. And I look forward to being able to see you and talk to you again next week, all right, when we'll have a bunch of new and interesting things to discuss, because if you haven't heard it here, don't believe it. Thank you and good night.
You have been listening and watching David Levy, gerontologist, a non-clinical family.
Was I too sing-songy?
No.
At CareGiverReality.com, and you'll see unscripted family caregiver support groups discussing all of the questions that you have